All right. Our next guest is the founder of Where Did the Puritans Go? She has extensive background in teaching university and high school students from Massachusetts to Hawaii. She holds a Master of Arts in Teaching from Indiana University. The character she portrays in Where Did the Puritans Go was a passenger on board the ship Arbella, the ship that brought the first Puritans and the charter from King Charles I to America. She also leads a very popular historical tour, and for more information, please log on to www.puritan-tour.com. Tonight, she portrays Anne Bassel, Puritan woman from 1637. Please welcome Linda Palmer.
Good evening to you, and welcome to the Massachusetts Bay Colony. I understand you all arrived just yesterday aboard the Hector from London. My, but you all look so hale and hearty for having been at sea for 8 weeks. Not a skirt place amongst you. God be praised for bringing you safely to New England. I will have a word in confidence with you, if I may, as long as no ministers or magistrates can hear us. Do not settle here in the Massachusetts Bay, at least not in the year 1637. You would be happier back in England under that papist Queen of Charles than you would here under the people of God. Harsh words of welcome, you must be thinking, and from a perfect stranger no less. Where are my manners? My name is Anne Bassel, wife of William Bassel of Prittlewell, Essex, lately of Scituate, a new town some 4 leagues south of here. In Plymouth Colony, not the Massachusetts Bay. A word of difference betwixt the two in my mind. Well, I will tell you a bit of our story and let you be the judge of your new home. William and I and the children left England 2 years ago because our ministers were being driven from their pulpits into a life of poverty by that Archbishop Laud. You can ask our own minister down in Scituate, Reverend Lothrop, how they kept him in a London jail and only let him go after he promised never to return to England. Well, now the bishops dealt harshly with us because we would not conform to their idolatries or man-made devices, such as altar raids, lacy surplices, caps and tippets and such like baggage and kneelings and crossings, none of which the early Christians ever knew. Now we came to New England to hear the word of God, preached as it should be, plainly and from the heart. If it is good preaching you want, you've come to the right place. But if it is only land and riches you are after, you will be sorely vexed in this Bible Commonwealth. Oh, the Bible Commonwealth, I do have much to tell you about it, but first, I'm all ears for news of England. Tell me now, are there still those back there who insist on calling us Puritans? Yes, no one here goes by that name. 'Tis a name our enemies have put upon us. Those who say we are disloyal to our King and his church. Well, I tell you, we have never separated from the Church of England. To do so would be next door to treason. For Charles is head not only of the government but of the church, and we are loyal to our King and to his church. Not like some of our friends to the south of here. The first comers, they call themselves, you know the ones I mean, the ones up the Mayflower. They make no bones about their disdains for the Church of England. They're truly separated from her, but I do digress. Here I am talking about the Mayflower, when it is your welfare we should be talking about. Now, I said to you earlier, do not settle in the Massachusetts Bay. It was as a woman. I fear the ground here is being tilled for superstition and bigotry. The ministers and the magistrates have put too much government in their religion and too much religion in their government. Why, only 1 year off the Arbella they were, when they decided that if a man was to vote in the annual election, he must be a member of their particular church. Now, sir, it does you no good to be a Protestant. Oh no, you must be their particular kind of Protestant. The New England kind, not the Old England kind. What do I mean by that? Well, let us say you all wish to join a church, and I pray you do. The first thing they will ask you to do is to reveal in front of the entire congregation how you're once lost in sin and how God saved you from it. To prove to them that you are of the elect. Then they will make you sign a covenant, a pledge of sorts, your solemn vow that you will abide by the ordinances of God and love one another. Well, every congregation has a covenant, or they would, but not everybody wishes to sign it. Some saying it makes the kind of Christian they were before, they were not. One of their parishes in England did not require them to sign any such thing. And what is more, here it is, 1637. And as yet we have no written code of laws in the Massachusetts Bay, as they do in England, where every man knows the penalty for it. Oh, no, not so here. Here the magistrates make up the law as they go along, case by case, and they justify it by saying, well, that is the way common law grew up in England in the olden days. Our first taste of New England justice was the case of poor Philip Ratcliffe, servant to Mr. Craddock up in Medford. Have you heard about him yet? So it goes. He had both his ears cropped, full cut off, and for what? Speaking out against their churches in England here. What is more, good wife? Let us say, one day you decide to tell your pastor that you do not wish to have your baby baptized. You have searched the scriptures and can find nowhere in there where it says that one should baptize an infant now, have you? Well, they will teach you otherwise. To whipping post. They say they do it all not because of your conscience, but because you reproach the ordinances of God. Now, there are many people here who say such actions do not agree with our English tempers. My husband being one of them. Vanishing for conscience sake, cropping up ears and whipping, making us to stink everywhere. I should not be surprised if this were the year to either make or break the colony. Already King Charles is asked to see the charter, and once it's in his little hands, that's the end of self-government in Massachusetts. What else does it behoove you to know about your new home? Well, we are at war with the Pequot Indians. And oh yes, Governor Winthrop stole the last election from Harry Bain. And poor Mrs. Hutchinson has been banished into the wilderness. All of Boston is still reeling over the fate of that pious Christian woman. Imagine banishing a woman with child for the 16th time into the wilderness in the dead of winter. The General Court found her guilty of slandering the ministers. She even told one of them to his face, "Your way of preaching is the way to hell." That was bold of her, was it not? And she did not deny that in her trial. Here is a curious thing. We English people came to England fleeing persecution by the bishops in England only to come here and argue amongst ourselves over doctrine. One man calling his neighbor a papist and the other child of Satan. It's my head toddy just thinking about it. But her trial was the talk of the town, with the people of Boston defending her. and the outlying towns vilified her. Well, it would have come to naught had her private devotional meetings for women remained just that, and not attracted the attention of notable gentlemen in town, including young governor at the time, Harry Vane, who I might add ate up her lectures with just as much enthusiasm as the women. Once high-born gentlemen started paying attention to the revelations of a woman, you can rest assured the ministers put a stop to it. But in the end, it wasn't her devotions or what she said to them that did her in, but her final words to Governor Winthrop at the trial. If you continue in this course, he will bring a curse upon you and your posterity, and the mouth of the Lord hath spoken it. Well, you just don't talk to the governor that way. Well, enough of these sad tales. Tell me, was your crossing a pleasant one? Good. Did you see any pirates? Well, the second morning, or second day out to sea, we spied 8 sails astern of us. Spanish pirates from Dunkirk, no doubt. We all made ready for an attack from them. Out of every ship, we cleared the decks of everything that would catch fire and tossed them into the sea. Our men took up their position with their ordnance, and we, women and children, went below. Now, you would think there would be panic, but nary a man, woman, or child showed any fear. The enemy turned out to be English ships all, some bound for Gibraltar, others for Canada. Well, every ship saluted each other, and the musketeers fired their small shot, and so our fear and danger was turned into mirth and friendly entertainment. Do not be troubled, should you not find a suitable town in which to send it immediately. It does take time. But keep always the words of 2 Samuel in your hearts. I will prepare a place for my people, Israel, and will plant them, that they may dwell in a place of their own, and move no more. I wish you Godspeed. Thank you for lending me your ears. There is more. There is a bit more. Unfortunately, you got the fun part first. Now you're going to get the history lesson. No, I have a little PowerPoint that I'd like to explain a little bit of what I said to you. Let me get my specs on here. Colonial pockets, there we go. Yes. I will go to the podium. Let's see. Wonderful. Thank you. Well, you might say, what a strange way to portray a Puritan woman. Didn't the Puritans come over here for religious reasons? For religious freedom? Then why was Anne so critical of the ministers and magistrates? Well, there were Puritans of all different stripes, as we will see. Anne was a Puritan, no doubt, if you count her membership in 2 colony churches, first Roxbury, then Scituate, as Puritan. She and her husband, William, were from the county of Essex in East Anglia, where many of the Puritan ministers preached and hailed from. But William was a very wealthy merchant who came from a seafaring family. His motivations to join the Massachusetts Bay Company might have had more to do with opportunity than religion. Anne is a relative unknown. We know when and where she was born, but not when and where she died. William, however, is very well known and was controversial in his time. Those words of distaste for religion and politics that you heard would have been his words, and I have him speaking through Anne. There's a certain mystery about William that intrigues me. Why did he join the Massachusetts Bay Company and pour loads of money into it, only to relinquish the benefits due him as an assistant and stockholder? Why did he come over here with his family for the first time in 1630 and turn right around 6 weeks later to go back to England? Why did they return 5 years later but avoid the Massachusetts Bay and settle in Plymouth instead? William was just one of many voices of dissent in the early days of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. His name appears in the diaries and letters of prominent men of the times, and in all cases the references to him are negative. Let's take a look at a few of those negative character references. One of them came from John Winthrop himself, the first governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony. He has been described by various historians as the purest, the gentlest, the broadest-minded of all who were to guide the destinies of the Bay Colony. Together with 700 other planters, he came over to New England, landing in Salem in 1630. In his journal, Winthrop calls Vassall a busy and factious spirit, always opposed to the civil governments of this country and the way of our churches. Another reference came from this man, Thomas Dudley, the deputy governor under Winthrop, a literal-minded type, ready to exact his pound of flesh whenever he thought it due him, says one historian. In addition to writing disparaging letters about Vassall to a wealthy benefactress back home in England, shortly after they arrived here, he also expelled Roger Williams in 1635 and hunted down Quakers. On the milder side, he was the loving father of our first woman poet, Anne Bradstreet. Our third character witness, the Reverend John Cotton, was the revered teacher of the First Church in Boston, the Puritan church par excellence for many years. Cotton made Vassall the object of a sermon he preached the day before Vassall set sail from Boston to London. Vassall was carrying a petition to Parliament complaining about arbitrary government and religious tyranny in Massachusetts. In return, Cotton called Vassall a Jonas worthy of being thrown overboard. Everybody in the congregation got the message. Edward Winslow, 3 times the governor of Plymouth Colony, was a friend, neighbor, and in-law of William Vassall. His stepson married Vassall's eldest daughter. He turned against him in his pamphlet, New England's Salamander Discovered, wherein he calls Vassall a man never at rest, but when in the fire of contention. So here you have a host of the most prominent men in religion and government in the early days of English settlement finding fault with William Vassall because he bucked the New England way. But to modern-day Americans, Vassall is the forerunner of our religious and political liberties. There were very few voices of tolerance in early Massachusetts, and Vassall was one of them. The historian of Scituate, Massachusetts, Samuel Dean, says that the men who wrote these detractions had a vested interest in preserving what Vassall was trying to undo. If we're going to choose between the two groups, we should side with Vassall, because it's his principles we now value, and not the intolerant ones of the rulers. It is my belief that Vassall's ideas of religious tolerance were in evidence early on, even before the sailing of the Arbella from England in 1630, and that those ideas were the cause of the friction between him and the builders of the Bay Colony. We will take a look at how the Puritan migration got started, what was going on in England in the late 1620s and early 1630s, and examine William Vassall's early career with the Massachusetts Bay Company to prove my point. William Vassall was born in 1592 in Radcliffe, Essex, that green county, and came from a distinguished family of French Protestants who immigrated to England in the mid-16th century. He and his brother Samuel were well-traveled merchants and supporters of Parliament's side in defending English liberties against Charles I. The area comprising Norfolk, Suffolk, Essex, and Cambridgeshire west of Essex and north of Essex. That region is where the bulk of the Puritans who immigrated to New England came from. I wish I had a picture of William, but I don't. Closest I have is this crest. Here we see the coat of arms granted to William's father by Queen Elizabeth I for his service to England in helping to defeat the Spanish Armada. The vassal family was wealthy. William's name appears on many documents of the Massachusetts Bay Company as one of the 127 original stockholders. His monetary and material support was vital to the success of the new colony. He was also one of the original 12 assistants, or lawmakers of the colony. Since our story hinges on vassals' religious disputes with the Massachusetts magistrates and ministers, it would be good to give you some background of the religious turmoil affecting Englishmen in the late 1620s to 1630s. I'll talk briefly about some of the major players in politics and religion at that time in England, and mention several of these players that all her listeners would have easily recognized. Anne mentioned King Charles several times. She was referring to this man, Charles Stuart, better known as Charles I, who reigned from 1625 to 1649. Charles believed fiercely in his divine right to rule. What others called arbitrary, he called his right as king. He angered Parliament, who refused to fund him money for his war with Spain. He put many Puritans in the Tower of London for refusing to pay up. William's brother Samuel spent 12 years in prison for refusing to pay tonnage and poundage of shipping tax. And John Winthrop's good friend, Sir John Eliot, died in the Tower of London for daring to cross this king. After giving the Puritans a charter which allowed them to establish a colony in Massachusetts, Charles had second thoughts and wanted to revoke it, doing away with Massachusetts' elected governor and replacing him with a governor of his own choosing. Now, Governor Winthrop and the early colonists showed a foretaste of resistance that would spill over into the American Revolution by stalling for time. Well, Your Majesty, we can't return the charter just yet, for it says there that the General Court must meet once a year, and it won't meet until September. So we must wait to discuss this at a later date. That later date didn't arrive until 50 years later. 4,000 miles between king and colony, as well as the king's own troubles at home, worked in Massachusetts' favor. Religiously, Charles I was all pomp and ceremony, and the bishops he appointed reflected his tastes. This, too, alienated the Puritans. When Charles couldn't get the money he wanted out of Parliament, he disbanded it for 11 years, a period that coincided with the heaviest migration of Puritans to New England. Charles and Puritans eventually clashed in a civil war, which ended with Parliament victorious and Charles beheaded in 1649. When Anne said, "Our ministers were being driven from their pulpits into a life of poverty by that Archbishop Laud," she was referring to this man. William Laud was appointed Archbishop of Canterbury, the highest office in the Church of England, by Charles I in 1633. He was a believer in beauty and order in worship and architecture. As a result, he reintroduced elements of formalized worship that had been left to decay for over 60 years. He ordered altar rails set up to keep the animals away from the altar. He also placed the altar at the east end of the church. Now, why would this get the Puritans all upset? This was offensive to them because it made the sacrament of Holy Communion the center of worship again, instead of the sermon. Puritans did have communion, but they brought out a table to the center of the church for that. For Puritans, the pulpit from which the minister expounded the Word of God was more important than the altar. The sermon more important than the sacrament. Laud would not tolerate Puritan lectures in parishes either. Now, what's a lecturer? A lecturer was a freelance preacher.
He was ordained, yet without a license to preach. To get around it, he earned his living by giving lectures or sermons, usually in the afternoons or after Sunday morning service, if the minister in the parish allowed it. After Laud was appointed archbishop, he suppressed afternoon sermons. He threw many nonconformist lecturers into prison, tortured and mutilated several. As soon as Charles reconvened Parliament in 1641, they condemned Laud to death. He was beheaded in 1645.